The sound of coins clinking onto the scarred wooden desk reached Hela Stonebreaker before the clerk even finished writing her name in the ledger, and she pressed her forehead against the cold iron bars of her cell, closing her eyes against the sight of the man who had just walked through the door of the Frontier lockup. "I'm not worth the trouble," she said, her voice low and rough, watching Kael Brennan count out silver pieces one at a time under the lamplight, his weathered hands steady and sure despite the late hour. He didn't look up, didn't pause in his counting, didn't acknowledge her words at all except for the faintest tightening around his eyes that might have been disagreement, or might have been nothing more than concentration in the dim light. 23, 24, 25 coins. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, watched with the patient expression of someone who had seen this dance before, though probably not between a human farmer and an orc woman accused of theft. "That's the full amount," the clerk said, scratching something in his book. "She'll need to appear before Magistrate Hollings within the month if the merchant presses formal charges, but she's free to go until then." Kael nodded once, a short dip of his chin, and finally turned to face the cell where Hela stood gripping the bars hard enough that her knuckles had gone pale green. He was not a tall man by human standards, perhaps 5 feet and 10 inches, with the kind of lean strength that came from years of farm work rather than any natural bulk. His hair was dark brown, shot through with early gray at the temples, though he could not have been more than 35, and his face had the weathered quality of someone who spent most of his time outdoors. His eyes were gray, clear and direct, and they met hers without flinching. "Keys," he said to the clerk, extending his hand. The clerk handed them over with a jingling rattle, and Kael crossed the short distance to her cell in 4 strides. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed too loud in the quiet building, and he pulled the door wide, stepping back to give her room to pass. Hela didn't move. She stared at him, this strange, quiet man who had walked into the lockup like he had every right to be there, who had counted out what must have been a considerable sum without hesitation, who was now waiting with the patience of stone for her to walk through the open door. "Why?" she asked, the word coming out harsher than she intended. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." "No," he agreed, which was not an answer at all. She searched his face for some sign of ulterior motive, some hint of the reasons men usually had for helping orc women in remote frontier towns. She found nothing but that steady gray gaze and a patience that seemed to have no end. After a long moment, she stepped through the door, her boots loud on the wooden floor. The night air outside was cold and sharp, carrying the smell of pine from the forest that pressed close to the edges of Milford's small collection of buildings. Hela pulled her worn coat tighter around herself and glanced at Kael, who was already walking away from the lockup with the same unhurried stride he seemed to apply to everything. "Wait," she called after him, and he stopped, turning to look at her over his shoulder. "I'll pay you back. Every copper. I don't know how long it will take, but I will." "All right," he said, as if it didn't matter one way or another, and resumed walking. Hela followed because she didn't know what else to do, and because the alternative was standing alone in the cold dark trying to make sense of what had just happened. Kael's farm, she discovered, was a 20-minute walk from the town proper, a modest spread of land with a sturdy house, a barn, and fields that even in the darkness she could tell were well tended. He led her not to the house but to the barn, where he lit a lantern and gestured to a small room in the back that held a cot, a trunk, and a wash basin. "Hired hands' quarters," he explained, his voice quiet in the lamplight. "Empty right now. You can stay here if you want. Pay off the bail with work if that suits you." Hela looked around the small space, which was clean and dry and infinitely better than the cell she had been occupying for the past 3 days. "Why would you trust me? The merchant said I stole from him." "Did you?" Kael asked, meeting her eyes. "No," he nodded as if that settled the matter. "There's well water outside, privy beyond the fence. I'll come get you at dawn if you want work." He set the lantern on the trunk and turned to leave, pausing in the doorway. "There's bread and cheese in the kitchen if you're hungry. House is unlocked." Then he was gone, his footsteps fading across the barnyard, leaving Hela alone with a lantern and more questions than she had started with. She sat down on the cot, which creaked but held, and put her face in her hands. 3 days ago she had been working as a day laborer in Milford, taking whatever jobs she could find to save enough coin to move on to the next town. Then Garrett Fishel, who ran the general store, had discovered his ledgers didn't match his stock, and instead of acknowledging his own poor bookkeeping, he had pointed at the orc woman who had helped him unload a shipment that morning. The town guard had been skeptical but obligated to investigate, and Hela had spent 3 days in that cell waiting for someone to prove she had been nowhere near the store's cash box, waiting for someone to check Fishel's records more carefully, waiting for anything that would clear her name. Instead, Kael Brennan had walked in and paid her bail without a word of explanation. She didn't understand it. She didn't understand him. But she was out of that cell, and that was enough for tonight. Sleep came in fits and starts, her mind too full of questions to settle. But when the gray light of dawn crept through the single window of the room, Hela was already awake and dressed. She found Kael in the barn, mucking out stalls with the methodical efficiency of someone who had done this task 10,000 times before. "Morning," he said, glancing up at her. "You eat?" "Not yet." He nodded toward the house. "Go on, can't work on an empty stomach." The kitchen was warm and smelled of coffee, which was already brewing on the stove. Hela found the bread and cheese he had mentioned, along with apples in a basket and cold bacon wrapped in cloth. She ate standing up, too restless to sit, and brought 2 mugs of coffee back to the barn when she was finished. Kael accepted the mug with a nod of thanks and took a long drink before gesturing to a pitchfork leaning against the wall. "If you're serious about working off the bail, I've got plenty that needs doing. Stalls first, then we'll move to the south field. Ground needs turning before the frost sets in deep." They worked in silence, which Hela found strange at first and then oddly comfortable. Kael was not a man who filled space with unnecessary words, but neither was he cold or distant. He simply existed in a state of quiet competence, doing what needed to be done without fuss or commentary. When she finished her section of stalls faster than he expected, he raised an eyebrow and said, "Strong," as if that explained something. "Orc," she replied with a shrug, though she was not particularly large or muscular compared to others of her kind. She stood perhaps 5 feet and 8 inches tall, with a lean build that came from years of hard travel and irregular meals. Her skin was the gray-green of river stones, her tusks small enough to be unobtrusive, her dark hair pulled back in a practical braid. "Handy for farm work," Kael said, which might have been a joke, though his expression didn't change. They moved to the south field after the stalls were clean, and Hela discovered that turning earth was harder work than mucking stalls but more satisfying in its way. The rhythm of driving the spade down, lifting, turning, moving forward had a meditative quality that let her mind wander while her body worked. She kept glancing at Kael, trying to understand him through observation since he volunteered so little through conversation. He was careful with his tools, she noticed, cleaning the blade of his spade when they broke for midday meal, checking the handle for splinters. He moved across his land with the awareness of someone who knew every rock and root, adjusting his path without seeming to think about it. When a bird startled up from the grass near Hela's feet and she jumped, he looked over with something that might have been amusement touching his features for just a moment. "Pheasant," he said. "Nesting season's over, but they get confused this far north sometimes." Hela realized it was the longest sentence he had volunteered all morning. "Do you hunt them?" "Sometimes. Mostly I let them be. They eat the beetles that would eat the crops." They ate their midday meal on the porch of the house. Thick stew that Kael ladled from a pot he must have started before dawn, served with more of the bread. It was good, simple food, and Hela ate 2 bowls before she realized she was being rude. "Sorry," she said, setting down her spoon. "I haven't eaten well in a while. No need to apologize. There's plenty." He refilled her bowl without asking, then his own, and they ate in the comfortable silence that seemed to be his natural state. "Can I ask you something?" Hela said when they were finished, gathering her courage. Kael looked at her and waited. "Why did you bail me out? You still haven't said." He was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes distant, looking out across his fields. "I was in that cell once," he said finally, his voice even quieter than usual. "Long time ago. Different town, different charge." Also false. Man who bailed me out was a stranger too, never told me why, just like I'm not telling you, but he gave me a chance to prove myself, and that mattered. Hela absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. What happened to him? "The man who helped you died 5 years back. Fever." "I was with him at the end. He said he was glad he'd taken the chance." Kael stood, collecting their bowls. "That's all the explaining I plan to do. You want to keep working, or you want to head back to town?" "I want to keep working," Hela said immediately, surprising herself with how much she meant it. They returned to the field and worked until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Hela's shoulders ached and her hands were sore despite their calluses, but it was the good kind of tired that came from honest labor. When Kael finally called an end to the day, she felt she had accomplished something real. Over the next week, a pattern emerged. They rose with the sun, worked until dark, ate simple meals and spoke little. But the silence between them grew warmer, more familiar, and Hela found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't in years. Kael never asked about her past, never pried, never made her feel like she owed him anything beyond the work she was already doing. He treated her like a person, not a curiosity or a problem or a monster, and that was so rare in Hela's experience that she hardly knew how to process it. On the 8th day, she caught him watching her as she repaired a section of fence, and when their eyes met, he didn't look away. "You're good at this," he said. "The work, you've done it before. Here and there. I've moved around a lot." She hammered in another nail, testing the board's stability. "Never stayed anywhere long enough to call it a real job." "Why not?" Hela shrugged, uncomfortable with the question. "People don't usually want orcs around once the immediate work is done, and I've never really had a reason to stay anywhere specific." Kael nodded slowly, processing this. "You could stay here," he said after a moment, his tone careful. "If you wanted. Past paying off the bail, I mean. I could use the help, and you're better at this than the last 3 hired hands I've had." Something warm and unfamiliar bloomed in Hela's chest, something that felt dangerously close to hope. "I'll think about it," she said, not trusting herself to say more. That evening she walked into town with some of the eggs Kael had given her to trade, intending to buy a few things she needed. The general store was still run by Garrett Fishel, and Hela's stomach tightened when she saw him through the window. But she needed thread, and she wasn't going to let him drive her away from the only shop in town. The bell over the door chimed when she entered, and Fishel's expression went cold and hard when he saw her. "You've got nerve showing your face here," he said, crossing his arms over his chest. Just because someone was fool enough to bail you out doesn't mean you're innocent. I didn't steal from you, Hela said quietly, keeping her voice level, and you know it. I know my ledgers don't lie. Money was missing, and you were the only one who had access that day besides me and my son. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You think I don't know your kind? Opportunists, every one of you. You saw a chance and you took it. Hela's hands clenched at her sides, but she forced herself to stay calm. Your ledgers don't match because you can't add properly. That's not my fault. Fischl's face went red, and for a moment Hela thought he might actually strike her. But then the door opened behind her and Kael walked in, his presence somehow filling the small space despite his lack of size or volume. Problem? He asked, looking between them. No problem, Fischl said quickly, his tone shifting. Just making sure Miss Stonebreaker understands she's still under suspicion. Kael's gray eyes went flat and cold in a way Hela had never seen before. She's under suspicion because you accused her. That's not the same as being guilty. And unless you have actual evidence, I'd suggest you keep your theories to yourself. I have evidence, Fischl snapped. My ledgers, your ledgers show a discrepancy, Kael interrupted, his voice still quiet but now carrying an edge like steel. That's not evidence of theft. That's evidence of poor bookkeeping. Could be you made a mistake. Could be your son made a mistake. Could be a dozen things that don't involve Hela stealing from you. Fischl sputtered, but Kael was already turning away, guiding Hela toward the shelves with a light touch on her elbow. What did you need? He asked her, his voice returning to its normal gentle tone. Thread, Hela managed, still processing the fact that he had just defended her to the man who had put her in jail. And needles, if he has them. Kael collected the items, paid for them before she could protest, and ushered her out of the store with the same calm efficiency he applied to everything else. They were halfway back to the farm before Hela found her voice again. You didn't have to do that, she said. Confront him, I mean. Or pay for the supplies. Yes, I did, Kael replied and didn't elaborate. Hela stopped walking, forcing him to stop too, and turned to face him in the gathering darkness. Why? Why are you doing all of this for me? The bail, the work, the defense. I'm nobody to you. I'm just some orc woman who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Kael was quiet for so long that Hela thought he might not answer at all. Then he said very softly, You're not nobody. Not to me. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning that Hela was afraid to examine too closely. Her heart was beating too fast, her breath coming short, and she realized with a shock that felt like falling that she cared what he thought of her. Not just as an employer or a benefactor, but as a person whose opinion mattered in ways she hadn't let anyone's opinion matter in years. Kael, she started, then stopped, not knowing what to say. He smiled, just a small quirk of his mouth, but it transformed his face, making him look younger and less careworn. Come on, he said gently. It's getting cold. We should head back. They walked the rest of the way in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now, charged with awareness and possibility. When they reached the farm, Hela didn't immediately head to the barn. Instead, she followed Kael to the house, and when he looked at her questioningly, she said, Can we talk? Really talk, I mean, not just about work. All right, he agreed and held the door open for her. Inside, he built up the fire while Hela sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea he had brewed. The warmth seeped into her fingers, steadying her, and when he sat down across from her, she made herself meet his eyes. I need to understand, she said. What you said out there about me not being nobody. What did you mean? Kael took a sip of his own tea, clearly gathering his thoughts. I meant what I said. You matter. To me specifically. I know we've only known each other a little over a week, but in that time I've seen who you are. You're honest, You work hard, you don't complain or make excuses, and you're kind even when you don't have to be. Kind, Hela repeated, thrown by the description. To the animals, he clarified. I've seen you with the chickens. The way you're gentle when you collect eggs even though you could just grab them. And yesterday, when that cat from the neighbor's place wandered over, you fed it scraps even though it's not your responsibility. Those are small things, but they tell me about who you are. Hela felt her face warm, unused to being observed so closely, unused to being seen. Those are just normal things. Anyone would do that. No, Kael said quietly. They wouldn't. Most people don't pay attention to things that don't benefit them directly. You do. That matters. She didn't know what to say to that, so she took refuge in her tea, sipping it slowly while she tried to organize her thoughts. I've never stayed anywhere long enough for people to see me that way, she admitted after a while. Usually, they just see what I am and that's enough. Orc, monster problem, take your pick. I'm not most people, Kael said, with such simple certainty that Hela almost believed him. No, she agreed, smiling despite herself. You're really not. They talked late into the night, longer than Hela had talked to anyone in years. Kael spoke about his farm, about how he had built it from nothing over the course of a decade, about the dreams he still had for expanding it. He told her about the man who had bailed him out all those years ago, a merchant named Thomas who had seen something worth saving in a young man falsely accused of cheating at cards. He taught me carpentry, Kael said, his voice soft with memory. Said everyone should know how to build something with their hands. I used those skills to build this house, this barn. Everything you see here came from what he taught me. He sounds like he was a good man, Hela said. He was. I think about him a lot, especially when I'm making decisions. I try to ask myself what he would do, how he would handle things. Kael looked at her across the table. When I heard you were in that cell, heard Fischl's story, something didn't sit right, so I asked around. Talked to people who had worked with you, people who had seen you that day. Everyone said the same thing. You were honest, reliable, kept to yourself. That didn't match up with someone who would steal. So you bailed me out based on what other people said? Hela asked, trying to understand. I bailed you out because my gut told me Fischl was lying, Kael corrected. What other people said just confirmed it. And then when I met you, when I saw you in that cell, I knew I'd made the right choice. How could you know that from just seeing me? Kael smiled again, that small, warm expression that made her stomach flutter. You looked angry, not scared. In my experience, innocent people get angry when they're falsely accused. Guilty people get scared. Hela thought back to that night, to how furious she had been at the injustice of it all, at being blamed for something she hadn't done just because she was convenient. I was angry, she confirmed. I'm still angry, honestly, but I don't know what to do about it. It's his word against mine, and he's a respected merchant, and I'm just a drifter. Then we need to prove he's lying, Kael said matter-of-factly. Find out where the money actually went. We, Hela repeated, caught on the word. We, Kael confirmed. You're not doing this alone. Not anymore. The warmth in Hela's chest intensified, spreading through her whole body, and she realized with a clarity that was almost painful that she was falling for this man. This quiet, steady, impossibly kind man who had seen her at her lowest and chosen to help without expecting anything in return. It terrified her. She had spent so many years guarding herself, keeping people at a distance, never letting anyone close enough to hurt her. And now here was Kael, slipping past all her defenses without even trying, making her want things she had long ago convinced herself she didn't deserve. Thank you, she said, her voice rough with emotion she couldn't quite hide. For everything. For believing in me. You don't have to thank me, Kael said, but his eyes were warm, and when he reached across the table to briefly squeeze her hand, Hela felt the touch all the way to her bones. Over the next few days, they began investigating in earnest. Kael made discreet inquiries around town, talking to people who had done business with Fischl, while Hela focused on trying to remember every detail of that day at the store. She had helped unload a shipment of goods from a wagon, counting items and checking them against an invoice. Fischl had been there the whole time, along with his son Marcus, a boy of about 17 who seemed perpetually nervous around his father. "Tell me about Marcus," Kael said one evening as they sat reviewing what they had learned. "What was he like that day?" Hela frowned, thinking back. "Jumpy." His father kept snapping at him for small mistakes, and Marcus kept apologizing. "I remember thinking the kid seemed miserable." "Interesting," Kael murmured, making a note on the paper in front of him. "I talked to the baker today, Martha Hollies. She said Marcus has been coming in lately, buying expensive pastries, more than a boy his age should be able to afford on an allowance." Hela sat up straighter. "You think Marcus took the money?" "I think it's worth investigating," Kael said carefully. "If Marcus took it and Fischl discovered it, he might have blamed you to protect his son. Or Marcus took it and Fischl doesn't know and blaming me was just convenient," Hela added, the pieces starting to fit together in her mind. They needed proof, but getting it would be difficult. Fischl wasn't likely to let Hela anywhere near his store again, and pressing too hard would alert him that they were investigating. Kael solved this problem by enlisting the help of Martha Hollies, who was already suspicious of Marcus's sudden wealth and willing to ask him some careful questions. 3 days later, Martha reported back. Marcus had been gambling, she said, meeting up with some boys from the neighboring town and playing dice games for money. He had lost badly at first, then suddenly had enough coin to keep playing and even win some back. The timing matched perfectly with when Fischl's money had gone missing. "So Marcus took it," Hela said, feeling a vindictive satisfaction at being proven right. "That bastard blamed me to cover for his son." "Seems likely," Kael agreed, "but we still need actual evidence." Martha's testimony about the pastries and the gambling helps, but it's not conclusive. That night, Hela lay awake in the hired hands' quarters, staring at the ceiling and thinking about proof and justice, and the fact that Garrett Fischl had been willing to destroy her life to protect his son's reputation. She thought about Kael, about the way he looked at her now, like she was someone worth looking at. She thought about the farm, about how it had started to feel like something dangerously close to home. She must have dozed off eventually, because she woke to the sound of someone moving around outside the barn. For a moment, she thought it was Kael doing early morning chores, but then she heard voices, low and urgent, and recognized one of them as Marcus Fischl. Hela slipped out of bed and crept to the window, peering out into the pre-dawn darkness. Marcus was there with 2 other boys, and they were counting coins by lantern light, dividing them up. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she didn't need to. The sight of Marcus with more money, clearly from gambling winnings or stakes, was damning enough. She needed Kael. She needed him to see this, to bear witness, because her word alone wouldn't be enough. Hela pulled on her boots and slipped out of the barn, moving as quietly as she could across the yard to the house. The door was unlocked, as always, and she found Kael in his bedroom, already awake and dressing by candlelight. "Marcus Fischl is in your barnyard with his friends," she said quietly. "They're counting money. You need to see this." Kael didn't hesitate, didn't ask questions, just followed her back outside. They positioned themselves where they could see without being seen and watched as Marcus and his friends finished their division of the coins. One of the boys said something about another game next week, and Marcus laughed and agreed, pocketing his share. After the other boys left, Marcus started to head home, but Kael stepped out of the shadows, making the boy jump and nearly drop his lantern. "Marcus," Kael said calmly, "I think we need to talk." The boy's face went white. "I wasn't doing anything wrong, just meeting some friends. At dawn, in my barnyard, counting money." Kael's voice was mild, almost friendly, but there was steel underneath. "That's a lot of coin for someone your age. Where did you get it?" "That's none of your business," Marcus said, trying for defiance but landing somewhere closer to panic. "It becomes my business when your father accuses my hired hand of theft to cover for you," Kael replied, and Marcus's expression confirmed everything they had suspected. "I don't know what you're talking about," the boy tried, but his voice shook. Hela stepped forward then, and Marcus flinched back. "You took money from your father's cash box," she said quietly. "How much?" "Enough to match what he said was missing." Marcus looked between them, trapped, and Hela could see the moment he decided to break. His shoulders slumped and he seemed to deflate, suddenly looking much younger than 17. "It was just a little at first," he said miserably. "Just enough to play a few games with the boys. But I kept losing, and I thought if I could just win it back, nobody would notice. So I took more. And then my father did his count and realized money was missing, and I panicked and didn't say anything, and then he blamed you." He looked at Hela with something like guilt in his eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for you to go to jail. I just didn't know what to do." "You could have told the truth," Hela said, her voice hard. "You could have let me out of that cell instead of letting me sit there for 3 days. "I know," Marcus whispered. "I know, and I'm sorry. I wanted to tell my father, I really did, but he would have been so angry, and I thought maybe if I just paid it back over time, nobody would ever know." Kael and Hela exchanged a glance. "You're going to tell him now," Kael said firmly, "and you're going to tell the magistrate. Hela's name needs to be cleared." "But my father will kill me," Marcus protested. "Your father will be angry, yes," Kael agreed. "But that's the consequence of what you did. You stole, you lied, and you let an innocent person take the blame. Now you need to make it right." Marcus looked like he might cry, but he nodded miserably. Okay, I'll tell him." "You'll tell him now," Hela said. "We're coming with you to make sure you do." The walk into town was tense and silent. Marcus dragged his feet, clearly dreading what was coming, but Kael kept a steady hand on his shoulder, propelling him forward. By the time they reached the official house, the sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Garrett Fishel answered the door in his nightclothes, his expression going from confused to furious when he saw his son flanked by Kael and Hela. "What's going on here?" he demanded. "Marcus, get inside, and you two, get off my property." "Mr. Fishel, I need to tell you something," Marcus said, his voice small and shaking. "About the missing money." Fishel's face went very still. "What about it?" "I took it," Marcus said in a rush, the words tumbling out. "I took it to gamble with, and I lost it, and when you noticed it was missing, I didn't say anything because I was scared. Hela didn't steal anything. It was me." For a long moment, Fishel just stared at his son. Then his face went red, and Hela thought he might actually hit the boy. But Kael stepped forward, his presence somehow commanding despite his quiet demeanor. "Mr. Fishel," he said, his voice level, "your son has confessed to theft and to letting an innocent woman be jailed in his place. The right thing to do now is to go to the magistrate and clear Hela's name. What you do with your son after that is your business, but she deserves to have her record cleared." Fishel looked like he wanted to argue, but he must have seen something in Kael's expression that convinced him it would be futile. "Fine," he spat. "We'll go to the magistrate, but this isn't over." "Yes, it is," Kael said quietly. "It's over because you're going to tell the truth and clear Hela's name, and then you're going to leave her alone. If you don't, I'll make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what happened here. Your choice." They went to the magistrate's house as soon as the man was awake, and Marcus repeated his confession with his father standing white-faced beside him. Magistrate Hollings, a gray-haired man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, listened carefully and then turned to Hela. "Miss Stonebreaker, it appears you've been wrongly accused. I'm dismissing all charges against you and ordering your record cleared. Mr. Fischel, you'll need to issue a formal apology, and your son will face charges for theft and for causing a false imprisonment." He looked at Marcus sternly. "Young man, you're looking at community service and restitution at minimum. Consider yourself lucky I don't throw you in that cell for a few days to see how you like it." Marcus nodded, looking thoroughly chastened, and Hela felt the weight she had been carrying for weeks suddenly lift. She was cleared. Her name was cleared. It was over. But as they left the magistrate's house and walked back into the morning sunlight, Hela felt something twist in her chest, because now there was no reason for her to stay. She had paid off her bail in work, her name was cleared, and she was free to move on. That had always been the plan, to drift from town to town, never settling, never staying. Except now she didn't want to leave. Kael was quiet on the walk back to the farm, and Hela couldn't read his expression. When they reached the house, he finally spoke. "I need to tell you something," he said, not looking at her. "That bail money I used to get you out of jail, that was all my savings. Every coin I'd put aside over the last 5 years. Hela's stomach dropped. "What? But you said you never said it was that much." "You never asked," Kael replied, still not meeting her eyes. "And it doesn't matter, I'd do it again." "What were you saving for?" Hela asked, dreading the answer. "A smithy," Kael said quietly. "I've always wanted to expand into metalwork, make tools and horseshoes and such. There's no proper smith within 20 miles, and I thought if I could learn the trade and set up a forge, it would be good for the community and good for me. I had almost enough to buy the equipment and hire someone to teach me." Hela felt like she had been punched. "And I've ruined it. You spent your dream on me." "No," Kael said firmly, finally looking at her. "I chose to spend it on you. There's a difference. Dreams can wait. People can't." "But why?" Hela demanded, her voice rising with frustration and something that felt too much like heartbreak. "Why would you give up something you wanted so badly for someone you barely knew?" Kael stepped closer, and Hela found herself unable to look away from his gray eyes, which were softer now, more open than she had ever seen them. "Because the moment I saw you in that cell," he said quietly, "I knew you were important. I didn't understand it then, and I'm not sure I fully understand it now, but I knew I couldn't just walk away. And every day since then has proven me right. You're kind and strong and honest, and you make me laugh even when you don't mean to. You're important to me, Hela. More important than a smithy, more important than money. If I had to choose again, I'd make the same choice." Hela's breath caught. "Kael," she whispered, and suddenly he was right there, his hands gentle on her arms, his face close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. "Stay," he said, so softly she almost didn't hear it. "Not because you owe me, not because you need to work off the bail. Stay because you want to. Stay because this place feels like home. Stay because I want you here." "I want to stay," Hela heard herself say, the words coming out before she could think about them. "I've wanted to stay for days now, but I didn't think I deserved to. I didn't think you'd want me to, not really." "How could you think that?" Kael asked, looking genuinely confused. "I've done everything but explicitly say I want you to stay." "You're not exactly clear with your words," Hela pointed out, and to her surprise, Kael laughed, a real laugh that transformed his whole face. "Fair point," he conceded. "Let me be clear now then. I want you to stay, Hela. Not as a hired hand, though you're welcome to keep helping with the farm if you want, but as a partner. In the farm, in the smithy if we can rebuild the savings for it, in everything, if you'll have me." Hela's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I'm falling in love with you," Kael replied, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I'm saying I want to build a life with you, if you want the same thing. I'm saying you're worth every coin I spent and more, and I don't regret a single thing." For a moment, Hela couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the overwhelming surge of emotion that threatened to drown her. Then she was kissing him, pulling him close, pouring everything she felt into that contact because words seemed inadequate. Kael made a surprised sound but recovered quickly, his arms coming around her waist, holding her like she was something precious. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Hela rested her forehead against his and smiled. "I'm falling in love with you too," she admitted. "I think I have been since you walked into that lockup and didn't even hesitate. You're the first person who's ever made me feel like I matter, like I'm worth something beyond what I can do or how useful I am. You see me, and you don't look away." "Why would I look away?" Kael asked, his thumb brushing along her jaw in a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." They stood there for a long time, wrapped around each other in the morning sunlight, and Hela felt something she had never expected to feel. She felt like she belonged. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and planning and stolen moments of affection that still made Hela's heart skip. She and Kael fell into an easy partnership, dividing the farm work between them and spending their evenings planning for the future. The smithy was still a goal, but now it was a shared goal, something they would build together. "If we save carefully and have a good harvest season, we could have enough by next summer," Kael said one evening, sketching rough plans for where the forge would go. "Martha Hollies has a cousin who's a smith. She said she'd ask if he'd be willing to come teach us the basics." "Us?" Hela asked, looking up from the sock she was mending. "Well, you're stronger than me," Kael pointed out with a slight smile. "Makes sense for you to learn the smith work too. Besides, I thought we were partners in this." "We are," Hela agreed, warmth spreading through her chest. "I just wasn't sure you'd want me involved in that part." "I want you involved in every part," Kael said simply, and went back to his sketches. Hela watched him for a moment, this man who had upended her entire life in the best possible way, and felt a fierce surge of affection. She set aside her mending and moved to sit beside him, leaning against his shoulder while he drew. He made a pleased sound and shifted to accommodate her, and they stayed like that until the candle burned low. But their peace was not to last. A week later, Garrett Fischel made one last attempt to cause trouble. Hela was in town buying supplies when she heard raised voices coming from the magistrate's office. Curious and wary, she moved closer and recognized Fischel's voice, loud and angry. "I'm telling you, there's been a mistake. My son was coerced into that confession. That orc woman and Brennan threatened him, made him say things that weren't true." Hela's blood went cold. She pushed open the door to find Fischel standing in front of Magistrate Hollings's desk, red-faced and gesturing wildly. Marka stood behind him, looking miserable and refusing to meet anyone's eyes. "Mr. Fischel," the magistrate said wearily, "we've been over this. Your son confessed freely, and there were witnesses to corroborate his story about the gambling." "He was frightened," Fischel insisted. "They intimidated him into lying to protect themselves." "That's not true," Hela said from the doorway, and all eyes turned to her. "Marcus confessed because he felt guilty. Nobody threatened him. He told the truth to clear his conscience." "You would say that," Fischel sneered. "You've been planning this from the beginning, haven't you? Seducing Brennan, getting him to waste his money on you, and now you're going to bleed him dry." "That's enough," Magistrate Hollings said sharply. "Mr. Fischel, I've heard your complaint and I'm dismissing it. The original ruling stands. Your son stole from you, let an innocent woman be jailed, and is now facing the consequences. If you bring this before me again without new evidence, I'll hold you in contempt. Fischel looked like he wanted to argue further, but something in the magistrate's expression must have warned him off. He grabbed Marcus by the arm and stormed out, shouldering past Hela hard enough to make her stumble. The magistrate sighed heavily. "Miss Stonebreaker, I apologize for that. Some people can't accept when they're wrong." "It's all right," Hela said, though her hands were shaking. "Thank you for standing firm." She left the office and made her way back to the farm, her earlier good mood completely shattered. When she told Kael what had happened, his expression went dark in a way she had never seen before. "He put his hands on you," he said flatly. "He pushed you." "I'm fine," Hela assured him. "It was just a shoulder check. He didn't actually hurt me." "That's not the point," Kael said, his voice still quiet but carrying an edge like a blade. "He's not going to stop, Hela. He's going to keep making accusations, keep trying to cause problems, because he can't accept that his son made a mistake, and he made it worse by blaming you." "So what do we do?" Hela asked, feeling helpless in the face of Fischel's determination to destroy her. Kael was silent for a long moment, thinking. Then his expression cleared and he stood. "We need to talk to Martha Hollies and some of the other merchants. If we can get them to testify about Fischel's character, about Marcus's gambling, about the inconsistencies in his bookkeeping, we can build a case that's so solid even Fischel won't be able to dispute it." "You think they'll help?" Hela asked doubtfully. "I'm still just an orc." "Most of them barely know me." "They know me," Kael said firmly, "and they know I wouldn't stand by you if I didn't believe you were innocent. That has to count for something." It did count for something, as it turned out. Over the next few days, Kael called in every favor he had, talked to every person he knew, and slowly but surely built a coalition of support. Martha Hollies testified that Marcus had been buying expensive items beyond his means. The owner of the tavern testified that he had seen Marcus gambling with boys from the next town. The seamstress who did work for the Fischel family testified that Garrett had always been sloppy with his accounts and quick to blame others for his mistakes. By the time Magistrate Hollings called a formal hearing to settle the matter once and for all, the evidence against Garrett Fischel was overwhelming. Not only had he falsely accused Hela, but his own poor business practices had contributed to the initial confusion about the missing money. And Marcus, when questioned separately from his father, broke down and confirmed everything, admitting that he had stolen the money and that his father had been willing to let Hela be punished rather than admit his son had failed. The magistrate's ruling was swift and severe. Hela was formally exonerated with the magistrate's personal apology entered into the record. Marcus was sentenced to 6 months of community service and ordered to make restitution to his father. And Garrett Fischel, for making false accusations and attempting to suborn justice, was fined heavily and ordered to make a public apology to Hela. The apology, delivered in the town square with half of Milford watching, was grudging and clearly forced, but Hela didn't care. It was enough. Her name was fully cleared, her reputation restored, and most importantly, Fischel's power to hurt her was broken. That evening, as she and Kael walked home from town, Hela felt lighter than she had in years. The sun was setting, painting the fields in shades of gold, and the air smelled of autumn and coming rain. "It's really over," she said wonderingly. "He can't touch me anymore." "No, he can't," Kael agreed, taking her hand and lacing their fingers together. "You're free." Hela stopped walking and turned to face him, struck by the truth of those words. She was free, truly free, in a way she hadn't been since she was a child. Free from false accusations, free from fear, free from the constant need to keep moving before people turned on her. And more than that, she was free to choose what came next. "I want to build that smithy with you," she said impulsively. "I want to stay here in Milford with you. I want to make a life here." Kael's face lit up with a smile so bright it made her breath catch. "Yeah. Yeah," Hela confirmed, and then she was in his arms, being lifted off her feet and spun around while she laughed with pure joy. When he set her down, Kael kissed her thoroughly, his hands cupping her face like she was something infinitely precious. "I love you," he said against her lips. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Hela replied, the words feeling natural and right. "More than I thought I could love anyone." They made it back to the farm as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, and Hela realized as they walked through the door that she had stopped thinking of it as Kael's farm. It was their farm now, their home, and the future stretched out before them full of possibility. The winter came on cold and hard, but Hela barely noticed. She was too busy working alongside Kael, too busy planning their smithy, too busy falling deeper in love to care about the weather. They spent long evenings by the fire, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's stories and dreams and fears. Kael told her about growing up in the capital, about how he had always felt out of place in the city and dreamed of having land of his own. He told her about the false accusation that had landed him in jail, a nobleman's son who had cheated at cards and blamed Kael when he was caught. He told her about Thomas, the merchant who had seen through the lies and given him a second chance, and about how he had worked for Thomas for 5 years before coming west to start his farm. Hela told him about her childhood in an orc settlement far to the south, about how human raiders had destroyed her village when she was 15. She told him about years of wandering, of taking whatever work she could find, of learning to expect rejection and cruelty as the default. She told him about the slow process of becoming hard, of building walls around herself, and about how he had somehow slipped through all of those defenses without even trying. "I don't think I was trying," Kael said thoughtfully. "I just saw you and knew I wanted to help." Everything after that was just following where that impulse led. "Your impulses are better than most people's careful plans," Hela replied, curling closer to him on the couch. As winter gave way to spring, they began actively saving for the smithy again. Hela took on extra work when she could, hiring herself out to neighboring farms for heavy labor. Kael sold surplus produce and animals at prices he negotiated with careful determination. Slowly, coin by coin, their savings grew. It was Martha Hollies who brought them the news that would change everything. She arrived at the farm one morning in early spring, her expression unusually serious. "I've had word from my cousin, the smith I told you about," she said without preamble. "He's willing to come teach you the trade, but he needs the work to start soon. He's got another apprentice lined up for next winter, so if you want him, it has to be this summer." Kael and Hela exchanged glances. They had been hoping for next summer, giving them more time to save. But this was too good an opportunity to pass up. "How much would we need?" Kael asked. Martha named a figure that made Hela's heart sink. It was more than they had saved, even with both of them working as hard as they could. "We'll figure it out," Kael said immediately. "We'll take on more work, sell more stock, something. We can make this work." But despite their best efforts over the next few weeks, the numbers wouldn't add up. They could get close, but not close enough, and the deadline was approaching fast. Hela found herself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling of what had become their shared bedroom and trying to think of solutions. It was Kael who came up with the idea, though it clearly pained him to suggest it. "We could sell the south field," he said one evening, his voice carefully neutral. It's good land, and there's a farmer 2 miles over who's been wanting to expand. It would give us enough." "That's your best field," Hela protested. "You've spent years improving that soil." "And I can do it again with another field," Kael replied. "The smithy is worth it. Our future is worth it." But Hela couldn't shake the feeling that they would be sacrificing too much, giving up too much of what Kael had built. There had to be another way. The answer came from an unexpected source. Hela was in town a few days later when she encountered Marcus Fischel, who was fulfilling his community service by repairing the town well. He looked up as she approached, his expression wary. "Miss Stonebreaker," he said carefully. "I'm sorry, I don't want any trouble." "I'm not here for trouble," Hela assured him. "I just wanted to see how you were doing." Marcus looked surprised, then cautiously hopeful. "I'm all right, I suppose. The work is hard, but it's fair. And my father and I are talking again, which is something." They spoke for a few minutes, an awkward but not unfriendly conversation, and as Hela was turning to leave, Marcus called after her. "Miss Stonebreaker, I heard you and Mr. Brennan are trying to start a smithy." "We are," Hela confirmed, wondering where this was going. "I want to help," Marcus said in a rush. "I know you have no reason to accept anything from me, but I've been saving my wages from the work I'm doing, and I want to give them to you, to help with the smithy. It won't be much, but it might help close the gap." Hela stared at him, genuinely shocked. "Marcus, you don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to," Marcus said earnestly, "but I want to. What I did to you was wrong, and I want to make it right in whatever way I can. Please, let me do this." Hela wanted to refuse on principle, but something in the boy's expression stopped her. He was genuinely trying to make amends, and refusing him would only make him feel worse. "All right," she said finally. "Thank you, Marcus. That's very kind of you." The money Marcus contributed, combined with contributions from several other townspeople who had heard about their plans and wanted to support them, pushed them over the edge. They had enough for the smithy. The day Martha's cousin arrived to begin teaching them was one of the happiest of Hela's life. His name was Robert Sterling, a gruff older man with burned scars on his forearms and a patient teaching style. He set up temporary equipment in Kael's barn and began showing them the basics of smithwork: how to work the forge, how to shape metal, how to judge temperature by color. It was hard, hot work, and Hela loved every minute of it. There was something deeply satisfying about taking raw metal and shaping it into something useful, about seeing the immediate results of her labor. Kael took to it as well, his careful nature serving him well in the precision work. "You two are naturals," Robert said after the first week. "I've had apprentices with far less aptitude. With practice, you'll both be fine smiths." As spring turned to summer, they worked from dawn until dusk, learning their new trade while still maintaining the farm. It was exhausting, but Hela had never been happier. She and Kael moved through their days in comfortable synchronicity, anticipating each other's needs, supporting each other through the difficult moments. And at night, they would collapse into bed together, too tired for much more than holding each other, but that was enough. The feel of Kael's arms around her, the steady beat of his heart under her ear, the knowledge that this was her home and he was her person, that was everything Hela had ever wanted and more. By midsummer, they were ready to build the permanent forge. Robert helped them design it, and with contributions of labor from several townspeople, they had the structure up in a matter of weeks. The day they lit the forge for the first time was a celebration, with half the town coming out to watch. Hela stood beside Kael as the flames caught and began to roar, feeling the heat on her face, and thought about how far she had come. From a cell, from despair, from believing she was worth nothing, to this. A home, a trade, a man who loved her, and a community that had accepted her. It was more than she had ever dared to hope for. "What are you thinking?" Kael asked softly, taking her hand. "I'm thinking about that night in the cell," Hela replied. "When I told you I wasn't worth the trouble and you were already posting bail. I was so sure I wasn't worth saving, and you proved me wrong in every way that matters." Kael turned to face her fully, his gray eyes serious. "You've always been worth it, Hela. I just helped you see it." "You did more than that," Hela said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me a life. You gave me hope. You gave me love when I didn't think I deserved it. Everything I have, everything I am now, it's because you saw something in me worth saving." "No," Kael said gently. "Everything you are now, you always were. I just gave you a safe place to be yourself." Hela felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Kael replied and kissed her softly, oblivious to the crowd around them. When they broke apart, Martha Hollies was watching them with an approving smile. "So when's the wedding?" she called out, making several people laugh. Hela felt her face heat, but Kael just smiled. "Soon," he called back. "Very soon." He looked at Hela as he said it, and the question in his eyes was clear. She nodded, her heart so full she thought it might burst, and his smile widened into something incandescent. They were married 6 weeks later, in a simple ceremony in the town square with the whole community in attendance. Magistrate Hollings performed the ceremony, and even Garrett Fishel showed up, standing at the back with Marcus and offering a stiff nod of acknowledgement that might have been as close to a blessing as he could manage. Hela wore a simple green dress that Martha had helped her sew, and Kael wore his best clothes with a nervous expression that made her want to kiss him. When it came time for the vows, Kael's voice was steady and clear. "Hela, you came into my life when I didn't know I was looking for you, and you changed everything. You made me braver, kinder, more myself. You're my partner in every way that matters, and I promise to spend the rest of my life proving that you're worth everything to me." Hela had to swallow hard before she could speak. "Kael, you saw me when no one else did. You believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. You gave me a home, a purpose, and a love I never thought I'd have. I promise to stand beside you, to work with you, to build a life with you, for as long as we both live." When the magistrate pronounced them married and Kael kissed her, the crowd erupted in cheers. Hela laughed against his mouth, giddy with joy, and let herself be swept up in the celebration that followed. The seasons turned, and Hela and Kael settled into the rhythm of their shared life. The smithy prospered, with orders coming in from farms and towns all across the region. They hired help for the busiest times, and Hela discovered she had a talent for the detailed work of making tools and hardware. Kael focused on the larger projects, the gates and hinges and decorative work that required both strength and artistry. Their second winter together was mild, and they spent the quiet evenings planning expansions. Another field, perhaps, and eventually a larger house. Maybe apprentices of their own to train. "We should think about children," Kael said one night, his hand resting on Hela's stomach in a gesture that had become habitual. "Should we?" Hela asked, turning to look at him in the firelight. "Only if you want to," Kael said quickly. "I know it's not something we've talked about much, and I don't want to pressure you." Hela considered it, turning the idea over in her mind. A child or children with Kael. Little ones with his steady nature and her strength, growing up on the farm, learning the smithy trade. It was a strange thought, but not an unwelcome one. "I think I'd like that," she said slowly. "Not right away, maybe, but someday. Yes, I'd like that." Kael's expression softened into something tender. "Someday," he agreed and pulled her close. That someday came sooner than expected. By spring, Hela was pregnant, and by winter, they had a son. They named him Benjamin Brennan, and he was perfect in every way that mattered. He had Kael's gray eyes and Hela's green-tinged skin, a beautiful blend of both of them, and when he was born, Hela held him and cried with a joy so profound it hurt. "He's perfect," Kael whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand with one careful finger. "You're perfect." "We made a person," Hela said, still amazed by the fact. "An actual person." "We did," Kael agreed, his voice full of wonder. Benjamin was an easy baby, all things considered, content to sleep in his cradle near the forge while they worked, growing strong and healthy on Hela's milk and the good food they provided. Watching Kael with their son, seeing the gentleness and care he showed, made Hela fall in love with him all over again. 2 years later they had another son, and they named him Liam. He was more active than Benjamin had been, always moving, always exploring, and he kept them on their toes. But he was also affectionate and bright, and Hela adored him. Life was full and busy and sometimes overwhelming, but it was good. So good that sometimes Hela had to stop and remind herself that this was real, that she got to keep this, that nobody was going to take it away. One evening, when Benjamin was 6 and Liam was 4, they were all sitting on the porch watching the sunset. Benjamin was telling some elaborate story about a dragon he had seen in the woods, which was actually a particularly large crow, while Liam chased fireflies in the yard. Kael sat beside Hela on the bench, their shoulders touching, his hand resting on her knee. "You ever think about that night?" Hela asked softly. "The night you bailed me out, sometimes," Kael admitted. "Usually when I'm counting my blessings, which is often." "I was so angry that night," Hela said. "Angry at Fischl, angry at the world, angry at myself for being in that position. And then you walked in and everything changed." "You changed my life too," Kael said, turning to look at her. "Before you, I had a farm and a plan and not much else. You gave me a family. You gave me purpose beyond just surviving. You made everything better." Hela leaned her head on his shoulder, watching their sons play in the fading light. "I used to think I wasn't worth saving," she said quietly. "I used to think the trouble I caused, the space I took up, was too much. But you showed me that wasn't true. You showed me I was worth the effort, worth the sacrifice, worth the love." "You were always worth it," Kael said firmly. "From the very first moment." Benjamin ran up to them then, breathless and excited. "Papa, Mama, can we have a story before bed?" "Please." "Of course," Hela said, ruffling his hair. "Go get your brother and we'll all go inside." As her sons raced off, laughing and shouting, Hela took Kael's hand and squeezed it. He squeezed back, and in that simple gesture was everything they had built together. Trust, partnership, love, family. They had started with nothing but a cell and a bail payment, with mistrust and false accusations and no reason to believe in happy endings. But they had built something beautiful anyway, something strong and true and lasting. And as they walked into their home together, their sons running ahead, Hela knew with absolute certainty that she had been wrong that night in the cell. She was worth the trouble. She had always been worth it. It had just taken Kael Brennan to show her the truth. The forge stood solid and strong beside the barn, smoke rising from its chimney even this late in the evening from the day's work. The fields stretched green and gold in the dying light. And inside the house, laughter and warmth and the promise of tomorrow waited. Hela Brennan, once a prisoner, once a woman convinced of her own worthlessness, was home. And she was loved. And that, she thought as Kael's arm came around her waist and pulled her close, was everything that mattered. The future stretched before them, full of possibility and promise, and Hela was no longer afraid to embrace it. She had found her place, her person, her purpose. She had found home in a way she never thought possible, and she would spend the rest of her life being grateful for the quiet man who had seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself. That night, after the boys were asleep and the house was quiet, Hela and Kael stood together on the porch, looking up at the stars scattered across the dark sky like diamonds on velvet. The air was cool and sweet, carrying the scent of growing things and the distant sound of an owl calling in the forest. "What are you thinking?" Kael asked, his voice soft in the darkness. "I'm thinking about how different my life could have been," Hela said honestly. "If you hadn't walked into that lockup, if you hadn't posted bail, if you hadn't seen something in me worth saving." "The world would have been poorer for it," Kael said quietly. "I would have been poorer for it." Hela turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. "Thank you," she said, pouring all her feeling into the words. "For everything. For seeing me, for choosing me, for loving me, for giving me a life I never thought I could have." "You don't have to thank me," Kael replied, his thumbs rubbing gentle circles on the backs of her hands. "Loving you has been the easiest thing I've ever done, the most natural thing. You're my heart, Hela. You're my home. And you're mine," Hela whispered and kissed him under the stars in front of the home they had built together, surrounded by the life they had created. They had started in a cell, with despair and false accusations and no reason to hope. But they had built something extraordinary anyway, through determination and love and the simple act of choosing each other every single day. And as they stood together in the cool night air, Hela knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. She was worth the trouble after all. She had always been worth it. And now, finally, she believed it too.